Good morning, everyone. Vice Chancellor, Professor Marwala, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Prof. Mpedi, members of the MNC, members of the ELG, colleagues from Nexus, our publishing partner, colleagues here at UJ, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Wisal Domingo, Dean of the Faculty of Law. I will be the program director and facilitator for today's proceedings. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the book, Law and Industry 4.0, Selected Perspectives on a New Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And I have to show you the book. I hope you can all see this. And colleagues, we are also streaming live on our UJ Library Facebook page. The editors of this fantastic book is Professor Mpedi, DVC academic, and Professor Njotini, Associate Professor and former Dean, a Vice Dean of Teaching and Learning at the Faculty of Law. They both have an introductory chapter and conclusion to the book, but the book also has 4 chapter contributions. And I briefly want to go through and just list the titles of those chapters, and we will be hearing from our authors soon. Chapter 2 is written by Professor Darlene Millard and Mr. Rian Lewitz, and that chapter is titled, What to Predict When You're Predicting: The Use of Artificial Intelligence in the Management of Student Success. Mr. Lewitz is the Senior Manager of the Center for Academic Technologies, CAT, at UJ. Then we have Chapter 3, which was authored by Professor Mzukisi Njotini, and this chapter title is The Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Future of Education. Do technologies result in the demise of a university? Chapter 4 is authored by Dr. Michelle van Eck senior lecturer in the Department of Private Law at the Faculty of Law. Her chapter is titled Institutional Legal Education Amidst a Whirlwind of Change. And the final contribution is by Dr. Arno Low, Senior Specialist, Instructional and E-Learning, and manages the Center for Academic Technologies, Thinking, Innovative E-Learning Development, our CAT Lab of UJ. His paper is titled Artificial Intelligence in Non-Law Student Training. So as you can hear, the book is filled with very thought-provoking topics and areas in the field of 4IR and the scholarship of teaching and learning. Our program today will start off with the official launch by our VC, Professor Marwala. We will then be addressed by the editors of the book, and thereafter the authors will provide us with some reflections on their chapter, and I will then open it up to a Q&A session. But I do want to just summarize the book, and I'm doing this by reading the synopsis of the book at the back of the book. And it reads as follows, open quotes, as pointed out by Nas, an American rapper, and colleagues here, I'm not going to rap. It says, hate me now, people fear what they don't understand. Hate what they can't conquer, guess it's just the theory of man. So these lyrics are somewhat applicable to the issues covered in this book. Academics and people in general are, and I think will be fearful of the new Industry 4.0 influence scholarship of teaching and learning, as long as they don't understand what they are dealing with. This can turn into hatred if they feel they cannot rise to the occasion and thrive. And so therefore it's incumbent upon us to ensure we adapt to and master the new situation. So that's the synopsis at the back of the book, and it really summarizes what the book is all about. But the pandemic has forced us to embrace new technologies and really reimagine how teaching and learning needs to take place. And we were all forced to innovate. And so this book contributes to the intellectual knowledge of law and Industry 4.0 and the scholarship of teaching and learning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our VC, Professor Marwala, to do the official launch of the book. Prof. Marwala.
No, thank you very much, Professor Domingos. Also would like to acknowledge the presence of the people who are responsible for us being here. We are grateful that you have taken time to write chapters in this book, and also the editors of this book. The world as we once knew it is changed forever. This shift is not a once-off defined just by the pandemic, but rather it is a paradigm shift. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has most acutely been felt in the sphere of unemployment and the rapid digitization of processes and operations. While the fourth industrial revolution has meant that these changes were to some extent inevitable, but the speed and breadth at which they needed to occur as a result of the pandemic could not be anticipated. Against this backdrop, universities have been forced to pause and reevaluate their roles and their approaches. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted conventional and traditional modes of teaching and learning in higher education. In a 2020 report, KPMG wrote, and I quote, "For many universities, the future arrived ahead of a schedule, abruptly and without invitation," close quote. This has had powerful effects on the higher education landscape, signaling a number of important changes that will likely hold into the post-pandemic future. Today, with the hindsight of lessons learned, we can begin conversations on how we harness the benefits of technology without displacing the important physical spaces of a university. Universities as communities are critical spaces for learning and remain pivotal to making higher education more than just buildings. The economist Milton Friedman claimed that, and I quote, "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around," close quote. It has been encouraging to be at the helm of an institution that has persevered with such tenacity against this backdrop. I am astounded by the leaps and strides we have made in the teaching and learning sphere against a seemingly insurmountable context. When you have a pivotal moment in history, it is a sign of true leadership that academics within the Faculty of Law turn their minds to the endeavor that we are all committed to, and that is teaching excellence. Considering the implications of 4IR for both theory and practice is essential if we are to produce law graduates who can take their place in a rapidly evolving society. It is a misnomer that the 4IR has implications only for engineers and scientists. I am reminded of a collection of studies in the US I read about earlier this year that demonstrated that artificial intelligence has been proven to predict outcomes of court cases better than lawyers. There is also an indication to suggest that AI could actually make better judgments than human judges. In general, AI systems make more rational decisions than judges. In 2011, researchers from Ben Gurion University in Israel and Columbia University in the US studied 1,000 cases by 8 judges in Israel. They found that these judges were harsher just before lunch than after lunch, with 65% favorable rulings after lunch and none just before lunch. They observed the same trend and found that the judges were more generous at the beginning of the day than at the end. As I argued at the time, to mitigate against this risk, judges should start using technology, harnessing the ability to input all documents and proceedings into an AI system, with the result being a recommendation on a case. The safety guards will have to be built in to ensure that even the AI system is free from bias. This could be a solution for those entrusted with making judgments and arriving at decisions that have far-reaching consequences. This book, which includes a compendium of scholarly work, showcases how law, the teaching and learning of law, and the 4IRs must coexist and respond with the required agility. Today's launch is a testament not only to the shifts we are seeing in a sector, but the University of Johannesburg's position as the preeminent leader in the fourth industrial revolution. Law and Industry 4.0 selected perspectives on a new scholarship of teaching and learning, which was co-edited by Professor Letlhokwa George Mpedi, our Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, and Director of the Center of International and Comparative Labor and Social Law, University of Johannesburg, visiting professor at the Law of the Faculty of Law of the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, and a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. And Professor Mzukisi, Njotini, Associate Professor, Vice Dean Teaching and Learning of the Faculty of Law at the University of Johannesburg, and a member of the South African Young Academy of Sciences. It's a symbol of the this book is a symbol of the great strides we have made. This book is a culmination of work carried out in the Faculty of Law over this period and alludes to several impressive staff development initiatives, including facilitating the attendance and delivery of papers at national and international law conferences with the view to encourage staff to write papers for publication to enhance the publication and increase their research output. With contributions from formidable academics in the law department, this book covers various pertinent topics such as the use or reliance on AI in managing student success, the effect of the 4IR on the future of education, the transformation needed to guarantee that institutional legal education embraces or takes advantage of recent forms of ICTs in promoting or augmenting teaching and learning, the relevance of AI in providing training to non-law students, and finally charting a way forward to deal with the effects of the 4IR in the shaping of the future of legal education and augmenting the scholarship of teaching and learning. Excitingly, the focus on the 4IR speaks directly to UJ's strategic objective. As a university that is leading the charge in the country and the continent, the pandemic has demonstrated that this is indeed the direction we should all be heading in. All the contributions in this publication are incredibly exciting and demonstrate that we really are on the precipice of change, great change. As we begin to contemplate a post-COVID-19 world, and some people think we are not going to reach such a world, that in fact we are going to go to the next COVID world, as vaccines are rolled out and lockdowns in some parts of the world ease, we find ourselves cemented and entrenched in the fourth industrial revolution. If the pandemic was the litmus test, the future of higher education is certainly an exciting and digital one. I thank you. Ngiyabonga, bayadanki.
Many thanks, Professor Marwala, for those words. I certainly agree that law and 4IR must coexist. I'm not sure about our judges, Prof. Marwala. We just had the JSC sitting and choosing many of our judges, but that is indeed a very interesting research that you spoke about how judges are making judgments and doing it before lunch and after lunch and at the beginning of the day. But you are correct, this book is a testament of the shift that is happening towards the fourth industrial revolution. And in addition to that UJ is a preeminent leader in that movement. I'm now going to hand over to the editors of the book. That is Professor Mpedi, and then thereafter Professor Njotini. But Professor Mpedi, we will start with you first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Professor Vassal Domingo, Vice Chancellor, Professor Domingo, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. VC, I need to start by pointing out that you inspired us to come up with this book project because of your interest in 4IR, your expertise in artificial intelligence, and also how you challenged us as a university, and also reassuring us, encouraging us that we each have a role to play in making a contribution in this exciting field. By way of a brief background, this book, started as a project that originated from one of the law endeavors of the Faculty of Law at the University of Johannesburg, which took place at the end of August, beginning of September 2019. And as you can imagine, lawyers like debating issues. But on this occasion, the Faculty of Law invited colleagues from UJ, but who are not lawyers, and they contributed, as you will hear from them later in the program. And this is something really exciting that, as lawyers, we don't only talk to ourselves, but we also want to engage with other colleagues who come from other disciplines. And in this case, the colleagues that contributed, who worked closely with academics were from the non-academic domain here at the University of Johannesburg. And we set ourselves this challenge when we started working on this project, that this is going to be a peer-reviewed book. And we knew from the beginning that there was nothing like it published in the country. But our aim was that we want to inspire others to follow in our footsteps and contribute, because there's so much to say, so much to do in this exciting area of teaching and learning in the fourth industrial revolution era. So the book reflects, basically, if I were to sum up, on 3 key questions. The first one, using my own words, would be, how can AI assist in teaching and learning in the legal field, in legal education? And in this book, there is a chapter, and you'll hear more about, which looks at the important question of student success, using or guaranteeing or ensuring student access using predictive analytics. And this is nothing new. This is something that is being used at the Faculty of Law with great success to predict whether a student will succeed or not, and putting some measures in place, not being reactive, but being proactive. The second question that is dealt with in this book is, and using my own words, what is the future of legal education? There are interesting articles, book chapters written, particularly in the US, on whether the brick and mortar law school, whether the brick and mortar law school will be a thing of the past soon, or whether it will remain. And these are the issues that are discussed in more detail in the book, and linking it also to the university. Is a university soon going to be a thing of the past or not? The last point, which is really close to my heart, because that is where I cut my academic leadership teeth, it's by being an HOD of a department that was responsible for teaching law to non-law students. So there's a chapter that looks at how do we teach law to non-law students, and using AI to ensure that the students understand and they are successful. Linked to this, there is an important topic that is also covered about how do we teach law students for a changing world. And this is just a fascinating, because we have to understand that, as we have already heard from the VC earlier, about how artificial intelligence can be used in courts and so on. The truth of the matter is that, especially with COVID-19, technology is being used more and more in our courts and in various areas that previously would be restricted to you have to be there physically as a human being. Now there are bots and so on rendering legal advice. Where do our students fit, or our graduates, when they completed their studies with us, which is quite interesting. I'm sure many of you have seen, a video that went viral on YouTube and other social media platforms, of a lawyer in the US who was apologizing to a judge. It was a virtual hearing, a virtual hearing, and he was saying, "My lord or judge," something like that. "Please, I'm not a cat, and my assistant is trying to help me." And these are the things that we need to really look at in terms of our teaching and learning, how we prepare our students to that future that they can be able to operate in person and also virtually. And we don't claim to have covered everything that needs to be covered, but we say this is a beginning, and we hope more will follow after this, this launch, and after people have laid their hands on this book and contribute more. One area that comes to mind is ethics, legal ethics in the fourth industrial revolution. Court etiquette in a virtual courtroom. We have seen all sorts of stories. I mean, in South Africa, for example, we know of several cases where legal representatives had a meltdown during a court hearing. So how do we prepare our students to cope with such environments? This raises questions about how do we prepare our students using moot courts, for example, for them to be able to operate in a virtual setting, and also in a setup where they have to present themselves in person. Now, in conclusion, because our authors now will give us the full detail, I just want to emphasize one thing about this new scholarship of teaching and learning within a legal, or let me say a law setup. It's really an exciting area that calls on three stakeholders, if I could call them that, or three parties or three groups, or categories to work together. Firstly is our academics. Definitely our academics have to be on top of their game when it comes to this. Gone are the days when an academic can say, look, I'm a chalk and talk academic. That's it. Academics will have to really update themselves, make sure that they are well equipped, make sure that they are knowledgeable in terms of the new technologies. And I can assure you here at UJ, we are at the forefront of this in terms of providing training, acquiring the latest software, and empowering our academics. I think this is important. The second point is also our students, how obviously the future is clear that it will be blended. How do we operate in such a setup in terms of ensuring that we prepare our graduates, our students adequately for an unknown future. Last but not least is a category that one could refer as the stakeholders. This would include your judiciary, this would include our practitioners, and so on. How do we integrate these stakeholders in our activities, and we ensure that academics and stakeholders work together, not against each other, in ensuring that whatever gains we have experienced now because of COVID, then we can build on that and take legal education forward. Last but not least, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I know this is not the time for vote of thanks. That will be done, but please allow me to take this opportunity and thank our Vice Chancellor for inspiring us and for always being there to support us and our activities, and really taking us into the fourth industrial revolution. We really appreciate it, VC. And I also wish to thank the faculty for availing the resources, to make sure that this publication sees the light of day. This would not be possible without our contributors who worked really hard and we're also supportive of the idea that this book is peer reviewed and then we can get subsidy, which was greatly appreciated. Without our publishers, nothing will work. And I want to thank our trusted publisher, LexisNexis, the publisher with the attitude, can-do attitude that never says, it's not possible. We really appreciate that. And I also want to take this opportunity and thank the Division for Academic Planning, Quality Promotion, and Academic Staff Development, particularly Dr. Menon, Ms. Angie Makabani, and Ms. Megan Stradom, for making sure that arrangements are made, working closely with the library, that I'm also grateful for making sure that this is a seamless production for us. And last but not least, I would like to thank my co-editor for having had that passion that I also had, worked around the clock to ensure that this book sees the light of day. I really appreciate that. Carissa, I think I should stop here so that we can hear more from my co-editor, and also from the authors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Mpedi. Prof. Njotini, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure, colleagues, whether my slide is showing. VC, DVC,
yes,
Chair, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The VC started off his presentation by talking about the paradigm shift. This paradigm shift, which exists given these new forms of technologies which disrupts, the way we teach and the way in which we communicate, content to students. And the future is what we were grappling with, in this book. It's something that we consistently, touched on in the discussion in all the chapters of this book. So, but what I thought I should do, I talk about to colleagues this morning, is the notion of teaching the way you were taught. We know that academics are mostly accused of mimicking a giant, or a previous academic, and then use the methods that academic is using because they work for them. This is, there's no problem, colleagues, in that, because we are told as academics that a dwarf standing on the shoulders of a giant can see further than the giant, him or herself. But I like the book written by Rita McGrath, Seeing Around Corners. Rita says, look, of course we have to understand that the way academics before us, and therefore they laid the foundation for the information that we have and we have to dispense to students. But the most important thing is to understand the environment within which we operate in, because according to McGrath, the answers are not necessarily in the building. The answers are outside the building. We need to go outside the building and try to find the answers that will augment our teaching and learning frameworks. Later, I will talk about the notion of uncertainty and complexity and try to match it to the scholarship of teaching and learning, or the intersection, or what the VC calls the coexistence of law and 4IR. Already, colleagues, by way of introduction, we see that technologies have a role to play. And here I'm not necessarily talking about 4IR technologies. I'm talking about third industrial revolution technologies, or technologies that emanated from a third industrial revolution. There's a notion, for example, that's being debated relating to credentials versus skills, degree over expertise. In other words, do I have to go to a university, to learn how to build a chair when there's an online video on YouTube that tells me, gives me the skills that I will require in order to be good at building a chair. But obviously, the idea of 4IR, or using 4IR technologies to enhance teaching and learning, is hampered by certain skepticism. Talking about, technology will compromise quality. It will lead to unfulfilled learning outcomes. And some even say, how are we going to ensure that technology responds to the 6 Ks of teaching and learning? But what we see going on is that technology has the role to play. As the VC says, AI could make better judgments. I was reminded actually when the VC was talking about the debate by some to ascribe the intelligence of a machine to a human intelligence. To my students, I always say, who says human is intelligent? A human is intelligent for that matter. So what we're going for is machines that do not mimic the intelligence of a machine, of a human. That's where the future of education lies, which is education 4.0. So, because here what we see is technologies which advances human or social development, enhances the values that underpins the scholarship of teaching and learning, and shapes the future of education. Already there is smart or intelligent machines for moderation, which are able to interpret large data, which is important for teaching and learning, and they are able to create intelligible meaning to this large data. And another technology development, AI development, is a human-machine AI, smart gaze, which is developed in Japan, which uses the theory of the mind, which we know, which we all know, relating to the notion that central pathway to the brain mostly emanates from the eyes. So therefore, if we use these technologies, we can make a real-time prognosis or predictive decisions relating to teaching and learning, and be able to track the behavior of students online, and be able also to modify our teaching and learning to be in accordance with the specific needs of learning of students. Now, colleagues, this comes at a price. We need to remodel our education. We need to ensure that there is this swift coexistence between our teaching and learning frameworks and the technologies that that we use to foster our teaching and learning. I argue, colleagues, that we no longer live in a world where there is uncertainty. In other words, postmodernism does not offer us uncertain challenges. We know of our challenges. It could be that we were uncertain about societal challenges in the pre and modern society, but current challenges are known to society, and therefore, but the challenge, the difficulty with these challenges is that they've become complex. Therefore, we need to have complex solutions in order to address these challenges. Already the Sustainable Good Development Goals talk about, in Goal 4, about inclusive and equitable education, a single renewed education agenda, which puts technology at the forefront, because our idea is pushed, is our idea of using our technologies for teaching and learning is to shape the future of a student. I will talk to that later. This is technology technology that automates knowledge and learning. The World Economic Forum talks about robot or R learning, which marks a disjuncture to what our colleagues in Pretoria talk about when they refer to e-learning. Therefore, we use robot for our teaching and learning because AI or new forms of technologies can make faster and better decisions. AI offer error-free big data processing. The VC example in Israel best illustrate, how best the decisions that are construed having used AI technologies can be. So the university has to change or remodel both the educator as well as the the student. In other words, we have to ask ourselves, are we preparing students for the future? If we're asking questions that students can easily get them from Google, or any online platform, does that incite knowledge on the students? Does that incite excitement for students to learn about the program that's being offered? Therefore, there has to be a remodeling of the educator and the university, because the idea is to indeed shape the future of learners, which to me is ideal in this, as one of the solutions to these complex challenges that confront universities. We need to ensure that our students possess the necessary skills to respond to the future of work that is presented by the digital economy. Again, earlier we talked about in the introduction about some of the skepticism relating to how are we going to use these technologies and also ensure that there's quality teaching and learning. But there is no evidence that suggests that the use of technologies compromise quality. We've seen it with the emergence of COVID-19, even those that had a skepticism relating to the use of technologies for teaching and learning. But what we need is trust in for our technologies. We need to ensure that we trust the algorithms that are built in the technologies. And of course, we need to understand some of the prejudices that exist in the development of the technologies, of these technologies. Already others are talking about algorithms of oppression or technologies that decolonize. But all of those exist in the human, not in the technology itself, but at least we can separate the issues. So we need to trust in the algorithms and be able to use these algorithms to shape the future generation of learners, or what is referred to as the Generation Z. So again, we don't have to use technologies. We don't have to take you to rely on technologies as an external entity to improve, teaching and learning. We need to work with the technologies. We need to use the technologies in order to effect change in the future of the students. So by way of concluding, what we see again, colleagues, is technologies being key to the scholarship of teaching and learning, technologies that supplement existing knowledge and are important also in the construction of new knowledge and skills, because society changes, and with the changes, new technologies emerge. One of the important developments in South Africa is the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And our hopes, from that commission is that because the commission, is founded on the premise, at least, that in relation to the first, second, and the third industrial revolution, the South African society were the passive observers of these developments. In other words, they did not participate in the development of these technologies, and therefore technologies were developed elsewhere, and then we became consumers. So what we hope is that we, the South African society, become a part and parcel of the development of technologies. One example that I usually make is the issue of RDP, which is an issue that is a headache to the South African society. So the question is, how can we use these technologies in order to respond to a South African challenge, or a challenge that is particularly South African, and we use these technologies to enhance the development of the society. So, but again, colleagues, what we have to do is to reassess the overall structure of education. We see in the development of education that education was more a communal activity, right? And later there was scholarship in education, right? Both the community and the scholarship of education emerged. Those emerged because education had to evolve. So we need to allow these technologies to foster changes in the education and be able to use these technologies for the benefit of us as educators and also in building the future generation of learners. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'll wait for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Njotini. You raised very important questions there about the remodeling of education. And I, in the back of my head, think the remodeling of legal education in and of itself. And as we know, the scholarship of teaching and learning in legal education is something quite novel, and there's not much written on this. So the book today is timely on that in terms of legal education and 4.0. And so the big questions too is, what are future fit students? What do those graduates look like? What skills do they possess? And then also, how do we understand future education in the context of first generation students, which we have here at UJ? But we'll deal with all those questions and engage with you later when we go to the Q&A session. I'm now going to move on to the reflections by our authors, and we're going to get an opportunity to have them reflect on the chapters that they've written. And I'm going to start off with Mr. Rian Lewis, who's the Senior Manager of CAT here at UJ. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Domingo. And is my screen sharing?
Yes, it is showing. I can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Domingo. Good day, Professor Marwala, the editors, Prof. Mpedi and Njotini, my co-authors and guests. Professor Millard and I were delighted to collaborate on a contribution for this book, which resulted in chapter 2, What to Predict When You're Predicting. In this chapter, we looked at the use of artificial intelligence in the management of student success. I won't go into exact details, but rather provide a high-level reflection on the main aspects of our research findings. The chapter itself is very detailed and provides a lot of insights into each aspect of the project, so please consider giving it some screen time. So without further delay, let me begin with how this research project came to fruition. This research originates from an operational need, where back in 2017, we asked ourselves, how can we improve our student success initiatives using evidence-based decision-making? We found that answer in learning analytics, which uses the artificial intelligence tool called machine learning to uncover patterns and insights from big data sets. These insights can be extremely useful to success initiatives when it is generated in a timely manner and provided to someone who has the ability to act on it. The result was that the Faculty of Law and the Center for Academic Technologies, CAT, combined efforts to bring learning analytics to South Africa on a scale that was not done before at our institutions of higher learning. The goal of this venture was to see if we can identify and help students who need it as soon as possible. Traditional approaches, for the most part, only identify these students at the end of a term, when it's too late for some of them. Helping students to pass is much more proactive approach than trying to motivate and stop students from dropping out when they've already failed one or more modules. How does artificial intelligence fit into this context? Within learning analytics, the prediction of student performance is one of the most popular strands of research. Yet, not a lot of this research is currently being conducted on our South African shores. Learning analytics can be defined as the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their contexts for purposes of understanding and optimizing learning and the environments in which it occurs. This is done by taking various big data sources and feeding that into a machine learning model, which has first been trained using older data from students who completed the modules before. Output from this model is then presented as an indicator of risk of failing a module. Visualizations and dashboards are then used to expose these indicators into a human readable interface. The information on these dashboards are presented in a manner that allows for further interrogation and interpretation by a human who can then act on this data in a meaningful way. This action is often referred to as an intervention, which I will elaborate on next. In order to expose these predictors, the tools we used were plugged into our online learning management system that was used by our lecturers. The predictions were generated on a daily basis and exposed to our academics in law on a dashboard within their modules, where they could track their students' progress and identify any student who is running a risk of not passing. In addition to the dashboards inside our learning management system, we also identified the need to have a bird's eye view of student risks across various modules. The dashboard did not provide us with such a specific view, so we ended up designing our own reports for that, where we used the raw predictions per module and generated a report for the Vice Dean Teaching and Learning's office that listed the students who were considered at a risk of failing in multiple of their modules. This allowed the faculty to be in a position to identify these students and reach out to them. Those contact sessions resulted in very individualized interventions that can be classified for the most part as being socioeconomic in nature. The lecturers, on the other hand, were open to interpret the dashboards and propose interventions they deemed appropriate for the specific time of the term. They came up with various interventions that included, but were not limited to food, shelter, financial or travel assistance, counseling, additional tutoring, disability assistance, revisions, workshops, tutorials, or even consultations with the lecturer. We saw several successes from this research. The focused and timely support saw a definite increase in throughput for the modules that participated. The foresight and the centralized oversight of students that needed support were very invaluable. Two unintended benefits were the fact that academics upskilled themselves on their LMS proficiency, and they also increased the level of blended learning activities. Both of these hugely benefited online teaching when COVID halted our in-person activities. The main drawback from this tool lay in the sizes of classes at South African universities compared to some of the American and European universities. And that made this tool rather labor intensive. Despite this additional workload given to the academics, they were able to make it work, and we saw a lot of benefits because of that. Another drawback that we realized was that using a proprietary tool, it focused a lot on our LMS data. So this meant that the accuracy of the prediction was directly influenced by the level of online activities in each module, meaning that more activities meant better predictions. From this research, it is clear that we need a slightly different approach that is more aligned with the South African context, one that takes our structures and sizes, as well as our varied student backgrounds, into account. Further to that, it is also clear that analytics is a tool with which success initiatives going forward will not be able to go without. And then in conclusion, this was really a very exciting and fulfilling project. And I'm really thankful that I could have been a part of this. and that the work has been included in this book. Personally, I learned a lot, and I'm also excited to take it forward at PhD level, where I'm currently investigating the design of support models using learning analytics for our South African context. My research is focusing on two of the main problems that we identified during the law project, where I am designing an implementation model that can work for South African universities and a prediction model that is aligned to South African parameters and varied data sources without being LMS heavy. Thank you. That is my reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Luetz, and thank you for your contribution and collaborating with the faculty in that way. It's very interesting. And what struck me was interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, this research was done and was undertaken in 2018 and 2019 before COVID. And one of the things that you mentioned was that the prediction accuracy requires significant online activities. So I was thinking it would be very interesting to see how that changed, because we were completely online, and what that predictive analytics and change should be in a comparative analysis with the face-to-face and the blended model that we're moving into. But once again, thank you. And I want to extend an invitation to you that we are more than willing to work again on one of these projects. It's absolutely fantastic. And like you said, it culminated in a chapter in a book, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now going to move on to Dr. Michelle van Eck, who's a senior lecturer in the Department of Private Law. Dr. van Eck.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm just going to put up my screen. Prof, could you please just confirm that you can see that?
I can see the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Domingo, Prof. Mawala, VC, the editors, Prof. Mpedi and Prof. Njotini, as well as my co-authors, guests, and colleagues for attending this event. And just a special thanks to the editors for the opportunity to contribute to this book. For me, the Law and Industry 4.0 really provide me with an opportunity to explore a close connection between legal industry, which is legal profession, and that of what I call institutional legal education, which is our higher education facilities. In fact, the premise of the chapter is this exploration of institutional education, transferring skill sets and competencies necessary for our future graduates in the legal sector. And the legal sector obviously being disrupted by technology at the moment. In this, what we need to consider is the employability of graduates in this changing market, and how would technology then ultimately have this ripple effect, not only within the legal profession, but within the institutional legal education as well. Now, one of the starting points in the chapter was considering what I call, let's just see if I can get the screen up. Yes, what I call a legal tech stakeholder environment. Now, the legal tech stakeholder environment has various stakeholders, as the legal sector has, but it's all the stakeholders that are impacted and influenced by technology in some way, shape, or form. And although these stakeholders are separate, they are interdependent of each other. Now, one of the major stakeholders in this legal tech environment is our law firms. Now, the law firms provide certain services to clients and is dependent on the needs of the client. And with current technology, clients are requiring more robust, agile legal services, reduced costs, quicker turnarounds, which is really facilitated by technology. And our law firms then have to look at technology solutions to be able to meet those needs of clients. Added in this whole sphere of interrelatedness, if I could call it that, is our institutional legal education, which needs to meet the needs of our law firms with regards to skills and competencies that are required to ultimately meet the needs of clients. Now, if we look at this, we may then say, well, the legal industry or law firms are influencing how we act as institutional legal education, which seems to be consistent with legislation like the National Qualifications Framework Act and the South African Qualification Authority, which both point towards qualifications being geared towards future employability of our graduates. Yet when we're looking at the skills and competencies that are required in our future graduates, we need to look at our changing environment and what technology is doing to disrupt our way forward. Now, technology influences currently in the legal sector can roughly be grouped into 4 categories. The first is our open source or do-it-yourself processes. And this is where the ability to engage with information and creation of standard documentation for individuals is facilitated without the need of a lawyer. And in that, there's then also the second major category, which is our document analysis and creation. This is where law firms use certain sophisticated forms of software to replace our traditional functions as lawyers. We're also seeing changes in law firms themselves. And this is our big law types of environments where there's reduced costs, change in overheads, use of facilities that are changing, use of billing practices, a more collaborative, interdisciplinary service offering, which is not just limited to law, but a wider scope of service offering to our clients. Boutique and virtual forms of law firms where there's specialized services being provided purely on an online or virtual process or offering. And then we see things like artificial intelligence, bots, robo-lawyers, which is where we're moving into the realm of 4IR. And the intention of those types of developments is either a partial or a full replacement of human functions in providing legal services. And I thought maybe it would be useful on this backdrop just to show you some of the influences that we've seen in the legal sector. Now, this 2018 landscape was the basis of some of the background information in the chapter. And you'll see that there's quite a lot of technology that's been used here. And I'm just going to quickly run through this. There's technology for drafting, contract management, analytics, prediction technology, e-discovery, quite a lot on legal research, contract due diligence, and so on, review and editing and contract management and practice management. But what I found very interesting in just preparing for today is that the legal AI landscape, when having prepared for the chapter, has changed in 2020. And this is currently the landscape as we know it, with major legal tech. And you can see that some of the material that was used or some of the software that was available in 2018 is now gone. New software has been developed. There's new categories where there's focus areas like collaboration. E-signing is quite a big factor at this point. Document management, legal spend, and so on. So although there are changes, we need to also be aware that these changes are constantly changing. And what we are experiencing last year, for example, may be very different in our legal tech landscape this year. Now, if we take this premise of there's a lot of software and there's a lot of changes in the legal industry, what type of disruption would there then be in terms of the status quo? And there can probably be 3 major forms of disruption. The first is that some of our core functions in the legal sector will not have a disruption at all. So they're untouched services. Examples of this can be, for example, high stakes document creation. Now, that's typically your bespoke documents, bespoke contracts, bespoke legal advice. Negotiations, advocacy, and ethical duties. Those are typically areas of the legal sector that we're not seeing too much changes and impact on from technology. But the second category, we're seeing some minor or incomplete disruptions. For example, alternative dispute resolutions. We're already seeing crowdsourced dispute resolutions being used online, e-discovery, other types of online processes. And then the third category, which impacts our core functions as legal practitioners, are the complete or major disruption areas. And this is where technology is really impacting and changing the scope of those areas. Examples of this can be document analysis, project and transaction management, low stakes document creation, that's your typical template creation. Now, based on all of this, you can see that at least some sort of on the legal sector as we know it. And if we accept that, then we can anticipate certain things occurring within the stakeholders that we've discussed earlier. One is that technology may result in a smaller job market. And if there's a smaller job market, then there is a reduced need for lawyers. This will have a knock-on effect on lower graduate throughputs and ultimately have a financial impact on institutional education. Now, institutional education must also then consider the new skills, knowledge, and competencies that are required within this new landscape. And this begs to question two things. Are we to change our existing qualifications to transfer the new and necessary knowledge, skills, and competencies to our future graduates? Or does it require some sort of qualification to support the changes we're seeing? If we are then looking at skills and competencies, naturally as institutional education, we need to consider how a person thinks, acts, interacts, and how technology then influences all these factors to set out what those skills and competencies may be. And in this chapter, what I try to do is see what those new competencies and skills may look like. And to do that, a baseline needed to be created. And that baseline was the core competencies and skills that are generally accepted as the core skills and competencies required now of our law graduates. And I've put some examples up on the screen. These are, for example, professional conduct, practice, office, file, case management, consultation, interviewing skills, communication literacy skills, very important, obviously, critical thinking, legal analysis, legal research, numeracy, etc. But what's interesting for me was that already computer skills at this stage is a core competency that is required. Now, looking forward to potential changes within the legal sector, which we've already seen is occurring, then what are the new skills, the new competencies that may be required for us to teach our future law graduates? If we accept that law firms are engaging in more interdisciplinary service offerings to clients, and it's not focused to purely law services, then we're looking at things like intra and interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, innovative reasoning, cross-disciplinary work, collaboration, teamwork, soft skills, but also then things called within technology, and perhaps an example that I can raise here is within contract law, there is a development in the use of smart contracts, which is basically a sophisticated computer program. Now, the question is, as a contract drafter, are we now to be expected to become programmers to use the software? Or are we going to use alternative ways of being able to engage in this new contracting form? So technology will become a major factor. If we accept that technology innovation will impact our legal sector, we must then also consider how we're going to transfer these different skills and competencies to our law graduates. And not to go into too much detail here, but there are two broad categories that we can put across in terms of acquiring skills and knowledge. The one is passive teaching and learning, and the other is active teaching and learning. Now, our passive teaching and learning is what we find in our traditional lecturing environment. But what I find very interesting is that some studies show that younger generational students, like our generation X and Y and Z and are very new students, actually are adopting a passive learning approach. Now, one of the ways to engage students into a more active learning is problem-based scenarios, and that seems to create a greater interest in certain subjects. And we're seeing that we are already using some of these techniques within our clinical legal education and authentic learning experiences to really foster that interest in creating certain skill sets like our critical thinking, our problem solving, and hopefully we can adapt that to also bring across the newer skills that is required in our future engagement in the law. One of the very important aspects of this chapter is then, how do we do this within a uniquely South African environment? And there are specific constraints within the South African environment that may inhibit or limit or reduce our ability to really effectively make these changes. Importantly, the South African education system has been described as a hybrid system, and this basically means that it has the ability to incorporate technology and its developments within its educational structures, but it is also constrained by its unique socio-economic challenges. For example, generally there are inadequate facilities, funding constraints, overcrowded classrooms. Language barriers become very important as they really inhibit effective communication, comprehension, understanding of information. And this is obviously linked into some of the more recent protests and focus areas like fees must fall and decolonization. If we consider all of this, we need to then consider from a strategic perspective, how do we respond as institutional legal education? Now, I've presented 4 suggestions to be included in this, and that is a possible focus on specific skills, specialized skills, and the transference of that. And that is off the premise that our generalist lawyer is reducing in the new landscape and the need for the generalist. The use of diversified technology within our educational environment, which we've really seen happen in the last year, and balancing our theory and practical education. Very importantly, as legal practice becomes more interdisciplinary, the focus needs to shift from purely legal education to also non-legal skills. In this, we see that technology may then reduce our practice-ready lawyers, which will have a financial impact on institutional legal education, specifically our student throughputs, and also legal jobs really becoming less available. To supplement this, what qualifications are there? Are there new qualifications, updated qualifications, new skill sets, different subjects within the curriculum. And those are things that we need to look at and what the book explores, or at least the chapter explores, beg your pardon. Just some concluding thoughts then. If technology is said to be the game changer, in which case institutional legal education would be impacted, then we should be developing agile and robust strategies to really progress in step with the legal sector and really to remain relevant. A failure to do this, I think, can result in institutional education really becoming a victim to disruptive innovation. And just as a concluding thought is, the importance here for me was to remain relevant in this environment. And I'll leave that at that thought. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Van Eck. I really enjoyed that presentation, and colleagues, the chapter you have to read. It is a concern because I also read recently that lawyers, that's one of the careers that will be obsolete in the future. And so that would have a huge impact on us as an institution. But you're absolutely correct. We have to develop strategies that's relevant to the change that is happening now. And I think that is very, very important. One of the things that I just want to say to colleagues was that I received a phone call last year where one of the law firms was asking me, they were saying, we're looking for a programmer, somebody that does engineering plus law, a programmer, but a lawyer. And this struck me, and Michelle, I think this is exactly what you're speaking to. What is the legal graduate of the future? Is it a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary graduate? And what will that legal education look like? But thank you for that. I'm going to leave it there. We'll engage with you again later. I now want to move on to our last author. That is Dr. Arno Lowe, who is the Senior Specialist of the CAT Lab. Dr. Lowe.
Thank you very much, Professor Domingo, and thank you to the authors of the book for your contributions. Thank you to the editor specifically and the faculty for making this information available in the form of a book. Ladies and gentlemen, while I'm sharing my screen, what is important for me is artificial intelligence, and most of the time how people see artificial intelligence. So what I've done in this chapter is I've addressed AI, or artificial intelligence, in two layers. The one layer is actually how one would see the artificial intelligence as it is in this world, related to non-law students. So most of the non-law students are not everybody or everyone becoming lawyers or as such involved in the deeper part of law practice, but like commercial law would go out so that students have eventually upon graduation that equipment to be able to know how the law works and to practice what is available in relation to law in whichever industry they are. And in the same sense, we are working with global citizens. And therefore, in this chapter, what I tried to address was how our artificial intelligence has become part of society as we know it. And then from this, I'm going to speak about knowledge filters and specifically take these knowledge filters into how our teaching and learning influences these law and non-law students that we have. So on the screen, we have symbols that we have been fascinated with for thousands of years, and eventually related to artificial intelligence. The good old Turing test was introduced in the 1950s. It has escalated so far that we see things like this today on our computer screens. My question remains, did I, as a lecturer of law maybe, or of a non-law students, have I incorporated things like this in my curriculum already? Because these are things that the Y, the Z generation we are working with is actually familiar with. Things like type in these texts or identify the different pictures. What is the security related to law and the internet around this? And does a student, for instance, of commercial law knows what the implications of this is and why it is embedded? So as we heard from Michelle as well, we are forced into certain ways of teaching. Um, the old Socratic method, the sage on the stage, where the pearls of wisdom drips off and students have to listen. And what we see on the screen, the old paradigm of teaching and learning, that has even gone further nowadays because our Y and Z generations have been taught differently. Here I take the example of Atlantis, for instance, when Plato explained it when he visited Egypt thousands of years ago. Today, the possibility might exist from an AI and a system like Google Earth, which traced a possibility. It has led to discovery, just like I feel that certain students must be aware of what old Plato had implied for us. It is not only speculative, but discoverable. And these type of intelligences we can incorporate in our curriculum by introducing students firsthand to these type of legal aspects and law websites where they can find and use information in an intelligent way. What was interesting for me as I was reading up on old Plato's discovery, how Plato referred to learning, where he said, we must reject the conception of education professed by those who say that they can put into the mind knowledge that was not there before, rather as if they could put sight into blind eyes. So the key word for me here is to put sight into those blind eyes. And I suggest one does that by means of activity, as our previous authors suggested as well. So the knowledge filter have already about 500 years ago started to fade in how our different generations are expecting information to come to them instead of a one-way teaching and learning communication. So fading out on the knowledge filter brought thousands of years of symbols right down to getting people to understand why and where they are. And these knowledge filters have brought about cultural differences, addressing different work forms, everything that can be commercialized at all has also come through the knowledge filter. If I look at how various cultures today and in the African context view knowledge, it is important that we should have a knowledge filter introduced with artificial intelligence in our artificial, what I call pedagogy. So by using symbols people all over the world are familiar with, brings the rest of the world closer to what the actual law would be for non-law students. So if I go further through the knowledge filter, I can see that the influence happened already here in the mid 1600s with William Harvey, where he said, but the heart is actually two pumps. And he was burned at stake because he mentioned that it was contradictory and a bit reversed in the knowledge filter that was introduced. And then later on, as the knowledge filter reduced further, today people still discover what Michelangelo implied with paintings and symbols, which might be religiously contradictory in a great sense there in the Sistine Chapel. So all of these examples show us how throughout history people have relied on symbolism to understand how law would work for everyone in the world. Hence the address of using symbols for artificial approaches and intelligences instead of in a systematic way, rather in our communication way. So if I have a look at the knowledge filter further going down, and I look at the implications of those knowledge filters and what it had caused in the world, it was havoc. So from nonsense caused like in the Second World War, we actually got to discover new solutions. There we have women mathematicians working on codes that needed to be decoded in World War, after World War II. After that, we had a lot of introduction to older forms of computers, which meant those computers still needed to be programmed eventually to be able to analyze certain situations. And like Michelle mentioned, certain artificial intelligences nowadays do not have to be harsh programmed, but they could be adapted. And that's why a bit of extra skill like coding is needed. So my question further on is related around the evolution of these machines we called computers up until today. How I could program my students in the good sense that they become lifelong learners adapting to this constant change in technology. Do I really have to give students a separate computer and AI course, or can I automatically integrate it into their curriculum by bringing what is happening in the world closer to them? And that is my contribution to the title of the book, Law and Industry 4.0, related to teaching and learning. If we look at this photograph, that was the actual calculations and monitoring of getting a man on the moon in the 60s. But if we go through a knowledge filter after that, it caused our baby boomer generation to refer to symbols of artificial intelligence, expression, and in the way they were taught. In those days, the teaching stance, Socratically, were very much um, taken away and apart from the sage on the stage way. Nowadays, students expect from us to be much more related to what's happening in the real world. So therefore, this knowledge filter has totally faded. We as X generation, speaking for myself, have gone through all the DOS things in computers, all these TV shows which caused fantasy for us, eventually giving us a bit of stimulation of what was expected, because our biggest teacher was actually television. And now later on, as we moved along, students are more on the internet, more engaging worldwide with other students, playing games online, not looking at these fantasies of expectations anymore. It has moved on that the knowledge filter has now gone to media, which have changed. Students don't know what this cassette is anymore, and I think they don't know that one could record an interview with a client on a cassette like that. Nowadays, videos, things like that are all done electronically. And we, as the generation succeeding our students and new lecturers, which are Y generation and Z generation coming in, are actually based on the fantasies of what we had of artificial intelligence. We never brought it back to our teaching and learning. It remained a fantasy, and now it stares us in the face of how to apply and use all of these things. Today it's in medicine and even in law. And I refer to something I've even got myself, a model of the Star Trek communicator, the origin of cell phones. All students are not familiar with the communicator in Star Trek, yet they teach and they learn on cell phones. Do I design my communication in teaching and learning that it's mobile friendly? Because nowadays lawyers communicate with one another via cell phone, via email. 5 years ago, I had a conversation with a good advocate friend of mine who said, "Shoo, if we couldn't pay so much money to get people to come and sit as a witness in law, just last year, how many cases were done via Skype, Zoom, Teams viewer, online already?" And people really adapted to it very fast. Do I incorporate it now in my curriculum where I can have moot court in a virtual environment? So all of these things we must do to keep our students abreast of what is happening in law. All of these images I'm flashing by are ways in which symbols stayed, proliferated throughout the ages and throughout certain centuries. So by merely using these symbols, I, as a lecturer, can be guided to sequence what I want students to know in a specific manner so that they are familiar with what is going on in the world and use these symbols, emailing, twittering, and the laws involved there. Labor law. Can a union be run online, for instance? And what are the implications? Law never changes, but the way in which it is approached or communicated to my students, especially the Y generation and of non-law students and the following Z generation, do I design intelligently so that I still leave the residue of a fourth industrial revolution within my students' minds as part of the equipment and the skill set they need to be familiar with law one day. All of these modernized things have been used throughout. So the argument I want to get to is that I am so far removed with our students that we work from what is going on at home, what is happening amongst friends, students as peers, and what is happening on campus. And if I want to move to macro level, what is happening in the law not necessarily the industry, but the law for non-law students. So by looking at that, I can see, but in a family, maybe as an example in a rural area or a less fortunate family, might not be as technologically inclined. But the moment my student moves amongst peers, there's much more interaction with technology. And with the provisions here at UJ, the technology and the skill escalates much more so that students are subtly equipped. My philosophy of working with what you have is important. I've got Wi-Fi on campus. Get my non-law students to use it, as within the next 3 years, what is happening now in the wider and academic community escalates right into the family life. I mean, vaccination certificates you can get from your cell phone already. If my mother and father doesn't know how to do it, my peers will show them or me how to do it. Did I build this into my way of teaching and learning, that students know where to find a reference, what online legal facilities are available? Can I use the UJ Law Library online as I use it when I'm inside the library? So the idea of AI is that it had actually always been here with us. It is now just attached itself to technology. And those skills in teaching non-law students who are not practicing lawyers must also be aware of what they will have around them one day and how they can relate that to the current curriculum of non-law and law service subjects. So in short, we do not want to deviate from the norm too much, but the norm has shifted. And that, Prof. Domingo, is in a nutshell what my article addresses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. That was absolutely fascinating, and particular for us because we have many service modules where we teach non-law students. And so your perspective as not being a lawyer is wonderful to hear, particularly using symbolic conceptualization to enhance that cognitive thought and to embed those knowledge filters with AI pedagogy. I found that absolutely fascinating. So thank you for that. And when you were speaking about symbolism, I immediately, as a lawyer, thought about there's a symbol at our constitutional court, which is this plant with people underneath. And I was thinking, there's a symbol we could use for students because it's rooted in constitutional democracy. It talks about bringing people together under a tree. It's the rule of law, it's mediation, it's all of those kinds of things. So thank you for that. And colleagues, if you haven't read the article, I want to say, please read it. We also have a link in the chat where you can get access to the book. So I'm going to open it up to questions and answers right now. Prof. Lowe, Dr. Lowe, is your screen still sharing?
Okay, I'll stop sharing the screen. There we go.
Thank you very much. But colleagues, before I open it up to the Q&A, I want to read out a congratulatory message which was sent to us. It is from Professor Managay Reddy, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We invited a few people. She was one of the persons that was invited. Unfortunately, she was unable to be with us, but she did send a message which I would like to read out just before we go to the Q&A session. So her message is as follows, and I'm reading directly from the email which she had sent. It states, "Dear ladies and gentlemen, when South Africa went into lockdown last year, many of us in higher education despaired at the very likely possibility that the 2020 academic year would be lost. Not so at the University of Johannesburg. displaying foresight and vision that few others had at the time, the leadership at this institution immediately sprung into action and put into operation plans which ensured that the migration to online teaching and learning happened with a speediness that belied the complexity of the arrangements needed. As a result, UJ successfully completed the 2020 academic year in 2020, unlike most other universities in South Africa, whose 2020 academic year extended into 2021. The visionary farsightedness displayed by UJ in 2020 has come to characterize the institution. Evidence of this is apparent in the innovative research and other work generated at UJ. This pioneering approach to higher education is also clearly evident in the book being launched today. This publication is amongst the first in South Africa to focus not merely on the impact of the 4IR, but importantly on using 4IR technologies to enhance legal education and teaching and learning in the higher education setting. I want to congratulate the editors of this book, Professor Mzukisi, Njotini, Professor Letlhokwa, Mpedi, and the authors of the different chapters on their most excellent publication. UJ's Faculty of Law is an inspiration to us all to embrace the disruption of the 4IR and to harness the wealth of opportunities it presents for innovative teaching and learning. I thank everyone concerned for leading the way on this. Once again, my heartiest congratulations to all and thank you. So colleagues, that was a message from Professor Managay Reddy, and on behalf of UJ, we wish to thank her for sending that message to us. I'm now moving on to the Q&A. I only see 2 questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to raise their hand or ask a question, but I will go to the first question. It says, we recently saw the advent of a judge who chose to deal with a case outside of a court at a spur. She was grilled for this by Julius Malema and others during the interview. I'm not a legal person by profession, but want to know if such is allowed by the legal profession. So that's a question. And nevertheless, Prof. Mpedi, can you comment on the future of brick and mortar courts, or will this be the way courts will expedite cases in the future? So there's the one question, I think, Prof. Mpedi, and let me just go. Prof. Mpedi, do you want to answer that before I move on to the next one? Sure, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof. Domingo. Thanks, Rudy, for the question. Let me start with the spur matter, which a lot of people found it quite interesting. There is more to the story, but I don't want to go to the details and the reasons why the court, or why the matter was heard at spur. But one thing that I want to mention here is that it should be understood. Look, I'm not saying it's right given the environment, at spur. We know it can be loud and alcohol is served and so on. But one thing that I need to mention today is that despite that having occurred at a spur, there are instances where judges can hear matters in environments that are not a court of law. There are cases, I remember when I studied law, one of the advocates that taught us used to refer to a matter where a judge gave an interdict wearing bath robes. He was brushing his teeth when lawyers came in and that this is urgent, these people are taking a child out of the country, we need to stop them now. So that can happen where a matter is not held in a court building. Prof. Domingo mentioned that symbol, of justice under the tree. There are a number of principles, for example, in South Africa, we talk about an open court, although I wouldn't say spur is an open court, of which an open court would refer to a situation where anybody can come into court, and listen to the proceedings. It's a pity we don't teach Roman law and Roman and Dutch law and legal history. I remember as a first year law student when we had to learn about the history of advocacy and stories, that we read about court taking place in Rome or wherever. in a town square, everybody listening, and the advocates, their robes, they have a pocket at the back, which was used for if an advocate made an important point that impressed the public, they will put in a coin in there and so on. So the notion that the court has to happen in a court building, it is not always like that, but obviously Spare is a little bit, another story. So I thought I should just mention that. Linked to this, there's a question about the brick and mortar court. I don't think brick and mortar courts will disappear. The way I see it is that there are cases that can be dealt with virtually, and there are benefits for that, particularly civil cases, that I think some can really be handled virtually. And in criminal matters, in as much as, yes, it can happen, but I think some criminal matters will definitely need the parties to be present. And as part of fairness, ensuring that an accused person gets a fair trial. I read a story during lockdown late last year, actually two jurisdictions. One was Nigeria, I remember that very well. Another one, I think it was Singapore, where a person was sentenced to death via Zoom. And that really, for me, I felt, something like this, where you can impose a death sentence on a person and you try that person via Zoom. I felt that the rights of a person are violated because, there is a lot of value in an accused person looking at his or her accusers and so on. And I haven't practiced law, and I don't plan to practice law, but one thing that I can tell you is that there's a lot to a witness than just the words uttered. The demeanor of a person while answering questions, while being cross-examined and things like that play an important role in ensuring that there is fairness and a person gets, a fair trial. So these are some of the things that one needs to look at. I want to go back to the issue of virtual hearings, particularly in the case of civil cases. Obviously, there are other challenges that we are facing. We know that data prices are really high in South Africa. In some instances, you can have money for data, but internet connectivity is poor. So these are some of the things that will need to be taken care of if this is to work. But all in all, I think such cases, if those that can be handled virtually, if we do that, it will free them some time, and unclock our court roles, Back to the criminal cases, before I hand over to Prof. Domingo, there's also another thing, in terms of an open court. Imagine, I'm not a criminal, but if I were to be charged with a crime, I would like my mother to be there with in the galley, to give me support. And here with virtual cases, especially criminal cases, if all of them were to be held virtually, it would be impossible for the old lady to join and support me. So there are pros and cons. The last thing now, once again, back to civil cases, is that it raises interesting points that we need to look at. I remember there was a case when the party said, requested the judge during lockdown for a civil matter to be held virtually. And they even offered the judge that will buy you data. And the judge rightly said, no, I will not take any data from the party, because the judge must be seen to be neutral and not biased. And these are some of the things that in this new scholarship of teaching and learning, we need to teach our students, that when they go, they shouldn't offer judges data and things like that. But then it's a new ball game. I think I should stop there, Prof. Domingo. Thanks for the question, colleague.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mpedi, because you do speak to access to justice and who's accessing the justice. I also want to say to people that court interpreters are very important as well, and language and how you're speaking. But I want to tell you a story very quickly about a community court and criminal justice. So community courts operate in certain rural areas. And a TV was stolen in one area. And this man was brought before this community leader. And they said, that's the TV. And the accused was standing there. And then the other person said, oh, no, that's not the TV that was stolen. And the community leader who's judging this said, but where does this TV come? And the accused person said, oh, it came from another part of the area. And the community leader said, oh, well, then you can take the TV. It's okay. It wasn't stolen in our community. So they let the man go, although he had stolen it from somewhere else. So there's all these things about having rule of law and who's judging. But let me go to the second question, which is how this is also by Rudy. It's how safe is legal information that are secured via AI? Cybersecurity has become the big buzzword these days. Prof. Njotini, I'm going to hand this one to you. Can you comment on the risks related to legal case information getting missing via the electronic means, or case files getting missing all the time in our courts these days?
Thanks, Chair. It's really a challenge for one to make a case in saying our information is secure online when big corporates are complaining about data and database breaches, and their government departments are saying our critical information infrastructures were compromised. But I would like to enter this question quite properly, Chair. In South Africa, we have the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework of 2015, which says the responsibility to secure information doesn't reside in one institution. In other words, you have the police, you have the CSIR that has to investigate current cybersecurity threats and also identify those that are likely to emerge in the future. But also us as users are also responsible in securing our information. And to giving effect to this idea of users being instrumental in securing information online, the Cybersecurity Hub issued a cybersecurity readiness report in 2017, saying you can have all the regulations in place, the police force that is instrumental in identifying. Of course, we can argue about whether they are fully equipped to identify, to investigate cyber crimes and cyber security breaches. But you can have all of that. But if users are not aware of the threats to their information, then you are likely to fail. Dr. Lowe quite expertly talked about Plato's two worlds theory, which is the physical and the metaphysical world, and the importance of those two worlds in bringing about scientific innovations and so forth. But linked to this is the idea that our idea to regulate or to control technologies is always to pass legislation. We can forget about how cumbersome the lawmaking process is, but the challenge with relying on legal regulations is that we don't understand or take time to understand how technology operates. I'll make an example, Chair. There's no lawyer or parliament or whatever, or a legal person that introduced passwords, usernames as a way of authenticating information online. So technology has a way of regulating itself, and therefore we need to tap into the codes. Lawrence Lessing developed, for example, the codes-based theory of regulating. Reitenbach developed the Lex Informatica, relying on technology and the codes that are built in developing the technology for regulatory purposes. But it is difficult to have that in South Africa, because already we have a legislation, the Cyber Crimes Act, which has more than 40 definitions of cyber crimes. So the idea is to criminalize almost everything and then hope that something that looks like cybercrime will fall into that. In my view, that's a legislation that's not in touch with how technology develops, and is able to model regulatory structures using, current developments in technologies, and investigating ways in which technology is likely to bring about new challenges in the future. I won't waste more time, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Njotini. Colleagues, are there any more questions? I don't see any questions in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. I'm going to ask anyone else. Okay, so I'm going to take the privilege of being the program director and facilitator now, and then just to tell Dr. Lowe that in his paper, he spoke about indigo children. And I was wondering how many of our students are indigo children, Professor Dr. Lowe. There's also the snowflake generation that colleagues speak to. And so I feel like besides being in the Z generation, we have to think about indigo children. And I was wondering if you would just want to touch and let our colleagues know what indigo children are.
Thank you very much, Professor Domingo. Yes, indigo children, wonderful group of children born throughout each generation, and they are usually seen as the prodigies throughout centuries. However, what was interesting for me about the indigos, and it's got like Prof. Mzo also said, a type of a metaphysical link to it. But most people who move in that direction would say that indigo children has got an indigo color around them. And if I should be more practical, an indigo aura color. But it's about the energy those children have, and they refer to indigo adults as well. So what is interesting is throughout centuries, all major leaders, and those were the ones I wanted to refer to in the presentation: Da Vinci, Michelangelo, our famous women scientists, computer people like Lady Ada Lovelace, Marie Curie, these inventors and people who were seen as leaders. And even in Africa context, even if it had not been noted down, it would have been, if I can, it might cause a debate, but refer to someone like Credo Mutwa, who lived. Those people are seen as indigo people. The thing is, they are more sensitive and they are highly intelligent. So there were, since the 1970s, many more, according to the research in those two sources I've given, many more indigos born into this world than what we had previously. So all those people who are now adults, grandmothers and fathers, and most of them are now parents of Y and Z generation children and the coming so-called alpha generation. Now, these indigos have also got the ability to tune, to feel people. So you get that a lot at universities and in school, where a teacher or a lecturer says to you, "But I feel my class." And they know how to handle these groups and how to address a specific topic. So a lot of them are coming in, and in the chapter, I also list the characteristics of those children. And we can see it a few years ago with the hashtag fees must fall. One of those characteristics is actually that an indigo person will totally go against a system. Not because it's rigid, not because they're forced, because they know the freedom of doing something is that they see themselves as bigger than only what people see. Therefore, their reach and knowledge is a bit further than what we usually know. And for me, a great harm is not to see, and I put in inverts, all students and all people we have as indigo people, because they will have that, and we must give them like Stephen Covey says a habit of a highly effective person, give them their moment. I think we're so caught up in forcing people into rules and doing things. We don't give the holistic person an opportunity to show him or herself. And I also think that's why our generations are so obsessed with selfies. But that in a nutshell is actually what had been only seen as esoteric is now in reality happening. I had a good cartoon before my PowerPoint bombed out here, where it's this man on the cloud speaking to an angel like God the creator, but he says, they are evolving so fast, we must reduce the cosmic rays. So that's actually referring to the indigo children. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And thank you for that, because when I read that in the chapter, it fascinated me a lot, because we tend to focus, and a lot of the work that we do is for at-risk students. So it's the predictive analysis of students who's at risk. And I was thinking when I read that, the indigo child is someone outside of that, and whether we are also creating opportunities for students who are on the higher spectrum level, who's thinking outside, I want to say, the box, and what are the opportunities, and are we tracking those students? Because those students are the ones that's going to deal with the wicked problems of the world, right? The ones that's coming up, the ones where we don't have the answers. And the pandemic is one of those crises that happened. But so my thinking was that we also have to nurture that talent. So thank you for that. I still don't see any questions or anything in the chat, so I'm going to conclude. I wish to thank Professor Marwala for taking time out of his busy schedule, and also for always supporting the law faculty. As Prof. Mpedi said, it was through your inspiration and your vision as our leader, our VC, that we saw the culmination and the bringing together of this book. So thank you for that. I also wish to thank the editors and the authors for the groundbreaking book. I want to say groundbreaking because it is a first within the legal fraternity, and I hope it's the beginning of many more to come. I want to thank the UJ team who made this possible, the Division for Academic Planning, Quality Promotion, and Academic Staff Development. To that entire team, thank you. To the Faculty of Law as well, and then also to the library, who's doing all the technical background, and I'm told this is live on Facebook as well. So thank you to all of them. And then once again, colleagues, thank you all for attending. And please, if you haven't read the book, you can download the book or you can reach out to us, but the book is in the chat. So thank you, colleagues, and have a good day. And thank you once again to the authors and the editors. Bye, everyone.
Bye, colleagues.
Bye-bye.
Bye.